Hi, my name is Hans Brouwer, and today I'll be talking about the design process of HP Design, the firm I founded, applied to a very particular project, which is a residential project for Marvel Realtors in Pune, which led to the project we call Sangria. Like most projects, it starts with a very simple outline of the plot, the property, which is a rectangular property with a bit of a panhandle to it. Applied to this is the requisite knowledge about various changes to the property outline through road widening, various setback requirements, an area of commercial use the client wanted to set aside along the main road, which is on the south side of the site, as well as the inclusion of amenity plots and TDR plots. So you end up with a remaining plot with a 10-meter setback into which we had to accommodate the client brief. The brief is, as usual, quite developed and detailed, outlining all the various subplots of the area, as well as the overall sellable area, in this case something in the order of 83,000 square meters. As is always part of our process, we investigate the climate, the orientation of the building, what the prevailing winds are, and how one might best accommodate residential architecture within this climate. The site itself was a greenfield site surrounded by nothing at the time. The road to our southern property line is currently quite small, but is projected to be a major commercial strip, hence the road widening along those lines. The prevailing winds are either from the southwest or the northeast, so again, trying to harness those as best possible to create comfortable living environments. What we did want to try and do is maximize the north-south exposure of our units, as we know that the east-west exposure ends up being very harsh in terms of solar heat gain. The design mix from the client came up to 240 units of various sizes, ranging from small 2 bedrooms to large 4 bedrooms. These were named T1 through T6. And then we ended up exploring how to accommodate this critical mass on the site, which I think is always a very big challenge when it comes to residential projects. The client had experience with residential developments and hence had a series of typical floor plates and unit configurations that they would like us to accommodate. So in this first round of exploration, we call it pressure tests, we apply the brief to the known typologies the client asked us to investigate. And in this case, it was a series of stacks, 20 in all, which is over the 12-story height, allows us to achieve the 240 units. The smaller units on the top row here are attached to a single core, so sometimes 3 to a core, whereas the larger units all had their own core and allowed them to stand alone with a slight exclusivity factor. When applied to the site using one of 2 typologies we were asked to look at, which is the Y typology, which is 3 units to a core, or a slab block typology, you can immediately see the density of applying this. Limited to 12 stories in height, so stilt plus 12 stories, you end up contesting for space. So applying the known typology on the site and trying as best to get out of the way one or the other, you end up by taking all of our available site open area and dividing it and cutting it up into very small strips, and hence these very tight courtyards and very claustrophobic sense of architectural space. We then, with these foam models, try to better understand and learn from these pressure tests. These foam models are very simple slabs cut into 1 floor per foam layer. On the top left-hand corner is a small plan representing the scheme. We identify the balcony living room zones with yellow and the core with orange. So immediately we begin to get a sense of orientation, whether you're facing north-south, east-west, and also what you're looking onto. One of the things that was made very clear to us in both the site visit as well as the client feedback from the marketing team was that given the site's greenfield nature, everything outside was considered hostile and not desirable because one would never know what might come up in the future. So the best orientation was to look onto your own landscaping whenever possible. So living, dining, and master bedrooms, whenever possible, should be looking into your own landscaping where pools, greenery, paving, all sorts of amenities would be located, and that would be considered positive. So these schemes all try to do that by putting the cores towards the outside and looking inside. Unfortunately, the density of the scheme undermined the general design intent. On the right-hand side, you can see here the commercial block, which is a low 4-story block running along the main road, is kept independent. So the remaining site is what we have to accommodate all these 240 units. We run through a series of these tests, both in plan and in 3D, each time standing back to take a look and seeing what we learn from it. None of these were actually beginning to give us anything satisfactory, although this is the first scheme where we see a little bit of an opening up of the open space because of the consolidation of the units into larger blocks, and thereby conversely the consolidation of the open space into larger open areas. So all of these tests are done and recorded for analysis and for better understanding. This is the first time when we realize if we can actually get all the units surrounding a larger open space, a kind of perimeter block, then we might have half a chance at creating something of a positive with the open space. And it really has to do with the proportion, the width to the height of that open space. And here we've got in the order of 60 meters across, or 62 meters or 66 meters across, where we're beginning to see that that's a nice size proportion. This next scheme looks at reducing the number of units that are sharing a core. So on the top row, all the units are 2 to a core, and on the bottom 2 rows, they're all single units to a core. That, of course, gives us more tower blocks, but a better core configuration. This was quite a high-end project, and the idea of trying to get a more exclusive access journey or experience to your unit was behind this thinking. So here, we also looked at just straight typologies. I think the Y typology we felt were not going to lead anywhere. We managed to get almost all the units except for 2 that end up sitting in the courtyard, and no matter what we do with them, they remain there, and so therefore became somewhat of a problem. If we took a 3rd unit in there by opening up the perimeter so that we don't end up with quite such a closed cell block concept, that was again something that came up out of this particular test, that we don't really want to have a 4-sided enclosed courtyard, which would probably have impact on both the spatial sense as well as the ventilation possibilities. So again, moving things around. This is a scheme where we attempted to try and subsume the commercial block. You can see the bottom row and the top, the right-hand 2 stacks of the middle row have a gray C indicated. That is the 4-story commercial stack. And what that meant is that this southern slab block can now be shifted further over to the south, increasing the actual footprint of the residential component by piggybacking the units of the south on top of the commercial. We have lost 4 stories of residential there, and hence we have the extra block of tower of stacks inside it, but the actual courtyard has now increased. Because we've now got 2 linear courtyards, each of those are 42 meters across, and we're beginning to see the benefit of hybridizing, I guess, the tower typology. So we learned something very important at this stage, that maybe by piggybacking a tower block onto a lower block, we get some kind of relief from the site dimensions and from the architectural form. So these are various permutations again. So as a process and a due diligence, we end up going through a lot of these studies, and we call it the process of exploration without prejudice. We do not judge these schemes before they have been made, because there's always something that can be learned from them that can then lead to the scheme that makes the most sense and then serves both the client's needs, the buyer's needs, as well as our own architectural needs best. And from these studies came the idea that maybe this piggybacking can be taken into consideration and generate a completely different typology that is no longer a tower block scheme. So here we have the preferred schemes. They're just now placed one next to each other. These are all things that we show our clients and say, okay, these are the ones that emerge as front runners in their own class. We then take them into a 3-dimensional model, which explores primarily spatial enclosures, so you get some of these low-down perspectives, but also orientation of their views. So the prime views are the ones that look onto our own landscaping, which are red. The yellow balconies are the ones that look outside of those main spaces, either towards the neighboring site or over the top of the commercial block to a neighboring site. So again, this scheme is in that sense imperfect. We have units that are not prime orientation that will affect both selling and pricing. But you can also see in the view 4 the nature of the open space created and whether it's a successful one. And this is applied as a process to all of the preferred schemes, so we can begin to judge them on apples with apples basis, so that we have the same assessment criteria applied. So it's quite a rigorous process and goes through several hoops in order to better understand which way we really want to go. The new approach is something that was arrived at by stepping back from the whole thing and saying, listen, we don't want to take this cookie cutter approach where we say we have 240 units, let's divide them into 20 stacks of 12 and then start to arrange them like chess pieces on a chessboard, optimizing their layout. Let's start by an architectural typology that has a sense of spatial definition per se, and then see how that can actually accommodate the units. So the first thing we looked at was whether we should change this sort of simple 12-floor stack, which sits on top of the stilts, by shifting the stilt up and then by pushing out the lower 4 stacks into the open space and pushing the upper 8 stacks out with its own vertical circulation and core, thereby creating a duality between lower and upper. There's no doubt that the lower units have a different relationship with the garden. They have an immediacy with planting, poolscape, and trees, which grow up to their own height, whereas the upper units get the benefit of an extended terrace on the lower level where additional greenery can be, and a larger space setting back from the opposing block. If we take that into 3D, and we do a lot of different studies, you see that we explore architecture in whatever form and medium makes sense, whether it's foam core or in this case SketchUp models and sequential models to better understand the way that a scheme comes together. It's all part of this exploratory process and the evolutionary process of finding the best solution. So here we have our east-west blocks at the lower level. We complete them with the north-south blocks and create these two very distinctive quadrangles. You can see here the cores for these lower blocks are integrated. And then we introduce the cores for the upper blocks independent from the lower ones so that there's no clashing of the two structures. And on top of those, we then have our superstructure units, which are the top 8 floors. And already here, we're beginning to like what we see. We can see that there is a duality to the experience of the lower quadrangle versus the openness of the upper 8 floors. Keeping the east and the west open is critical for the purpose of for the enclosure. We learned that from earlier studies that if you complete the perimeter block as a complete rectangle, you end up creating a very tightly defined courtyard, which is actually a bit claustrophobic. So keeping these east-west openings free of architecture was very critical, and having all units looking at the courtyard with optimum north-south exposure, except for the lower units, the 4-story blocks running north-south. We then have to apply the client brief to the project. You can see here color-coded each of the unit typologies running up through the project, lower duplex, upper duplex, the roofscape of the 4-story blocks, and then finally the 2 slab blocks that run east-west above. Sections through the court tell the story. The commercial block is on the right, separate from the project, with its own green roof. And you can see here what we call ubiquitous greening. We have recreated a ground plane at level 4, which you'll see in later models really becomes home to roost when looked at from the upper units. And I think it's very important to understand that the landscaping is, although designed as a place to experience and go to, is probably most often appreciated as a place to look onto from your unit. It's often the case that the landscaping is very rarely visited, but is actually seen every day from your living room, from your balcony, and from your master bedroom. So as a visual backdrop, it's absolutely critical to understand the importance of this landscaping. The east-west section tells the story of scale. Here we have our 2 60-meter courtyards, low blocks, all with a very immediate direct relationship with the courtyard. Both courtyards are completely traffic-free. They're pedestrianized environments. They're for families and people. The next study is, again, reanalyzing the view studies. Of course, there are no intermediate or minor views. They are all prime views. But the difference here is the sheer sense of space and the luxury of space being created by this typology. And it's a little hard to reconcile the fact that this particular scheme is the exact same quantum of real estate as all the other previous schemes looked at, just taking a different approach on how to arrange it. And I think that's the key thing that was gained from here. I'll go quickly through the next sequence, which is looking at each and every unit, ensuring that The brief is properly accommodated. Like many clients in India, the client had a very detailed room by room schedule stating exactly what size each room was, and there were many rounds of testing that we went through in order to get the layouts right. But we do this for every single unit around the courtyard, and we do that coming up to the tower blocks as well. So again, the next round is going up a scale, ensuring the concept stays intact. Like with many projects, we find that the goalpost is often moved well into the project development. Here we found out that the outline geometry of the project was in fact incorrect, and we had received a new survey that changed quite considerably the proportions of the site and made it quite challenging to accommodate the exact same amount of real estate while safeguarding the concept. But we managed to do so. The courtyards got only marginally smaller, from 64 down to 60 and 61 on the north-south direction, but the basic geometry was kept intact. At this point, we also started to overlay structural engineering and services engineering, and we take the project through its different floor plans from the roof of the 4-story building to the towers. At this stage, we have a slightly more developed 3-dimensional model, which is no longer about the view plane organization, but more of the spatial enclosure. The landscaping at this point is a placeholder, later to be replaced by the actual landscaping produced by the consultant. But the design intent here is clearly explored with the ubiquitous greening concept, where the roofscape of the 4-story blocks is heavily landscaped, and you can see how that affects the overall feel of this central space. Having kept all the cars and the access to the perimeter of these buildings, you end up in this very lush environment, which then becomes really the key selling point or unique selling point for the overall design. At this point, the facades are not really developed. They are block models. The double height terraces are explored, but everything else is still very elementary. And at this stage, again, another change was requested, that we increase the amount of real estate. And through ongoing negotiations, I suppose, the client informed us that, in fact, the height limit of 12 stories can be expanded, and we wanted to incorporate a significant quantum of additional real estate. So at this point, we took this scheme and we looked at creating another model. This is a much more detailed model. It's what I call an architectural model, which gives you a sense of the building scale, the fabric, the floor to floor. So these are actually made up out of individual floor plates. It's a much larger scale. And we ended up going through about 3 or 4 of these models to explore how to best accommodate the additional real estate. And the conclusion was, rather than piling it up on both sides of the linear blocks, putting it onto one side only, and thereby creating an asymmetry to the actual spaces, was preferred to bring both sides up in parallel. So you end up with a 17-story unit on the north side of the development and 11 stories on the south side, and seen from both sides. That relief on one side was very critical, and we actually understood it better through the study of these kind of models. Then reapplying this to the site, now it's much more detailed. You can see the units are getting much more detailed. The engineering is now incorporated. Landscaping is still at this point a placeholder. And the section as it came along. Here you can see the beginnings of the courtyard floor itself receding into the parking podium, so that we end up with a sort of a stepped profile landscaping. The blocks in the middle then could accommodate underneath the units a clubhouse, and thereby create a through path from one courtyard to the other underneath the blocks. The 3D model in SketchUp is now becoming much more detailed. We've incorporated here the landscaping produced by a wonderful outfit called Schma out of Bangkok. The facades are now beginning to take place. In the bedrooms, we end up with a very strong vertical blade wall condition on the towers, which you can see this cadence of vertical walls. Between them are either terraces or bedrooms. You can see here the bedrooms end up with the vertical fins on the outside for solar protection from the low east and west sun. And you can also see how the landscaping is beginning to differentiate the two courtyards. The courtyard further away is for children with slides and steps and things like that, and the courtyard closer to the camera is more for repose and relaxation, more adult zone. So each stage of the design is getting into more detail, is incorporating more interest, is beginning to flesh out the scheme. So it's far from a singular sort of inspirational step where the scheme sort of appears. This is actually a very methodical process that has taken several months to arrive at, and as a result, I think is a much more refined project, which is also integrating feedback from various corners of the team, be it from the marketplace, be it from the client side, the engineering support, or our own architectural and landscaping design intentions. So once the basic scheme has been fleshed out, we do also recommend that a model is made, not one in-house by our own architects, but done by a professional model maker. This forms a very key part of the marketing suite. This model is also done in Singapore under our direction. We feel that the models tell a different story from the two-dimensional collateral, and it's an important part of both our own as well as the client and buyer's experience of the project. So we take great pains to ensure the accurate and deliberate integration of detail into the model, both in terms of the architecture as well as the landscaping, because there are certain things that are just much more tangible when one moves around a model and can stick your head into it and get a sense of place. So furniture is in here, landscaping, the pool has the mosaic bottoms to it. As much detail, even in terms of planting, is incorporated from the species of trees. You can see on the further courtyard away are these flowering trees versus the evergreens on the closer courtyard. So it does show sort of this process that took several months to get to. And we're very proud of this project. It's now on site. The concrete work is almost topped out. I believe the completion of this project will be sometime in 2016. We're very happy to say that the sales of the units was extremely swift, and it was very well taken by the marketplace. Thank you for your time.